Greetings, friends around the world. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Bible News Prophecy Channel. Today I want to talk about 5G and the Antichrist. 5G, what's that? The Antichrist, how can it be related? Well, we're seeing things happening in terms of technology different than we ever had before. Now, the term 5G actually has to do with something called the fifth generation. He said, fifth generation of what? Kind of cell phones, actually. The first generation wasn't even called 1G, but it was the original cell phone technology, which was analog in nature. And that got replaced with something called 2G, and 2G was a major upgrade. It was digital. Then we ended up with what we call 3G. Now, 3G is when we started to see things like smartphone technology and those kinds of things going on. And we started to see basically people starting to use their phones more and more for more and more things. Then we went to 4G. 4G was a lot faster. And for example, I travel on an airplane, I'll see people watching movies and stuff on their phones because 4G has allowed them to do that. But what about 5G? Well, 5G is the fifth generation. And this is supposed to be much faster. Some people say it's going to be 30 times faster. Some people say it's 100 times faster. And basically, it should allow all types of connectivity. What do you mean connectivity? People believe that ultimately 5G, or perhaps 6 or 7G, will allow people to do things such as know what's going on in their house when they're not there. Perhaps medical doctors can see what's going on with your pacemaker when you're not even at their office. So we're talking about massive interconnectivity, and things are changing rapidly. Now, some people believe that with 5G, this is going to make it easier for different types of warfare, and it's going to affect artificial intelligence and those kind of things. And a lot of people have called what's starting to happen now the Internet of Things. In the past, the Internet has basically been data, but now we're talking about the Internet controlling all kinds of things or being connected to all kinds of things. Perhaps your refrigerator, your stove, and everything else. And yes, I know theoretically they can do a lot of that now. But with the speeds, the upload speeds they're talking about making things fairly instantaneous. We've seen essentially a revolution, particularly in the Western nations, about how life is going on. I mean, in the old days, you might have a phone, and perhaps if you were a little more sophisticated, you had an answering machine on the phone. But now, most people, most adults seem like they carry a phone with them. And this phone is more than just taking phone calls. They can look things up, they can shop, they can get directions, they can do things. Life has changed. They started to do texting. They didn't do that with 1G. And that's changed a lot of ways people behave and act. But the Internet of Things is connecting all kinds of things, and not necessarily all of them that are good. Now, one of the reasons I decided to talk about this was that I saw an article in the news this week from the Russian Patriarch Kirill. He's the Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, and he warns that the Antichrist is going to control humans through gadgets. He says basically because this collects location, interests, and fears, he says it makes it possible for human beings to be controlled by external forces. So let me read a couple things that Patriarch Kirill said. Control from a single point is a harbinger of the coming of the Antichrist. The Antichrist is a personality that will be at the head of the World Wide Web, controlling the entire human race. Thus, the structure itself presents a danger. And he stressed, if we don't want to bring the apocalypse closer, there should be no single center or control center. Well, we're getting to the point where that can be done. People started to wonder years ago if cell phones could be related to it. The fact that they can figure out where you are with cell phones shows that you have less privacy, and we could have more in terms of totalitarian control. Some of you may be familiar with the book by George Orwell called 1984. In that particular society, what they had were not cell phones, they hadn't thought of that, but they had computer screens that were up. Kind of works if you ever use Skype. It's kind of like that. The person could see you, could talk to the person, and they could watch you and see what you were doing. Well, nowadays, many people carry cell phones, and cell phones know where you are. They know who you talk to. They know kind of where you've been shopping. They know where you've been traveling to. They know all kinds of stuff about you. But they also give you an ability to learn things. It's amazing. In the old days, as a researcher, I would have to take time off of work, drive up to a research library, go through some indexes and stuff, wade through all kinds of journals just to find a little piece of information out. Now it's instantaneous. Just go on the computer, type a few things, or on a cell phone and do the same kind of thing. Well, you may know that this was prophesied. Back in the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 12, verse 4, I want to read from the New King James Version of the Bible. It says, "But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase." And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing knowledge increasing, and we're seeing more and more uses of this knowledge. Governments are interested in this knowledge. Governments have been involved in censoring the internet. Governments have been involved in monitoring the internet. You don't think this is a harbinger of what's going to happen? Well, it certainly is. If we go to the book of Revelation, we learn about one called the Beast. Now, the Beast is supported by the Antichrist. In Revelation chapter 13, I'll read a couple of verses here, starting in verse 1. It says, "Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his 10 horns and on his heads a blasphemous name. The beast we saw was like a leopard, his feet were like the feet of a bear, mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, his great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast." The beast's power is going to rise up. It's going to be a power people thought was gone, but it's going to be around. In verse 4 it says, "So they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, 'Who's like the beast? Who's able to make war with him?'" And if you continue in here, you find out that he's going to persecute the saints for 42 months, but he's going to be supported by one. Starting in verse 11, Revelation 13, it says, "And I saw another beast coming out of the earth. He had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. He exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. He causes all the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed." He's going to cause people around the world to do this. Why? Is he physically going to be everywhere in the world? No. One of the ways he's going to do it is verse 13. He's going to perform great signs. He makes even fire come down to heaven and the earth in the sight of men. People are going to fall for this. They're going to be deceived, says verse 14. "He deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he's granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image of the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived." He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, so the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many who would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. You say, well, that doesn't sound like it's got anything to do with 5G. And those parts probably don't. Demons are involved. Satan is going to be involved. But the next parts, now we're getting more into technology. Verse 16, "He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it's the number of man. His number is 666. The ability to control buying and selling was not possible when the Apostle John saw the revelation and penned this over 1900 years ago. It wasn't possible then, but it is now. Things such as 5G are getting us closer. As a matter of fact, to hold this up, you may see this, there's also something called 6G and 7G. And basically, these are taking us to another level. The G, by the way, stands for generation. And by the way, if you're something about 10G, that's not a generation, it's got to do with broadband stuff, it's not the issue. But this 5G stuff, and followed by 6G and 7G, we're getting to the point where much of what you're going to do, who you talk to, where you've been, what you buy, what you want to sell, is going to be monitored. We're getting more and more to the point where more and more transactions are done digitally. I'm talking about purchases. And anything that's done electronically will be tracked. That's how you'll be able, one of the ways the beast is going to be able to control buying and selling. Now, do I believe that 5G technology of itself is the mark of the beast or is a sign of the Antichrist? Not necessarily, but it's not the mark of the beast per se, but as far as a sign of the Antichrist power being able to rise up and control this? Yes. And we're getting closer and closer. Now, some people, when you hear about 5G, they're very concerned about it. They're concerned that it hasn't been sufficiently tested, that this type of wavelengths on people are more or less microwaving people, and it's going to cause problems. There have been some health complaints where some of these things have been looked at. Some people think it can cause damage to the eyes, cause sweating, skin damage. Let me continue. There's a list I found here. Immune system disruption, metabolic disruption, neurological disturbances, leakage of blood barrier, damage to sperm, increased risk of cancers, collapse of insect populations, rise of bacterial resistance, damage to plants, and various other things. That may or may not be the case. It's going to be very hard to know that, but the reality is they're still planning on implementing it. We don't know all the possible health impacts that things like 5G are going to have. And one of the differences between 5G and some of the other ones is there's going to be more, what we used to call cell towers, in more places are giving off more radiation. So there may be some health risks associated with it. But the bigger risk is not that we've got technology, but that throughout history, humankind has had a tendency to abuse technology. And the Bible warns about one's going to be able to control buying and selling. 5G technology is almost here. What I mean by that, some people say it's starting to be implemented on 2019, it'll be fully implemented by 2020. Some of the things I've heard that are ascribed to 5G, maybe they won't come out until 6G. But the reality is, these things are happening now. People who discounted the Bible and say all these prophecies can never happen, they're never going to happen, and people were wrong in the past when they thought things were going to happen. It should give some pause the fact that the Bible said knowledge would increase in time of the end, and it has. Computers are one part of it. Stuff like 5G technology that could basically integrate all kinds of stuff in with your phone is astounding in terms of some of the good it can do. But as we see more and more governments interested in the internet, what people do on the internet, we see censorship of the internet, and we see prophecies warning us that buying and selling is going to be controlled, we really need to put two and two together and say, wait a second, the end is getting closer. And it certainly is. A time of totalitarian control is going to come. The Eastern Orthodox, or the Russian Orthodox Patriarch Kirill, is correct that gadgets such as 5G, he didn't say 5G particularly, he said gadgets, will be used by the Antichrist and the beast power. That is correct. Now, it doesn't mean you can't use your phones, but when you do use your phones, and you marvel at many of the things it'll be able to do, not just now, but what it'll be able to do in the future, remember, the Bible warns that that's going to be greatly abused. And the time of the coming beast with its Antichrist supporter is not too far from now, because that's what the Bible tells us. So as far as fearing 5G, it's going to happen. There will be some benefits from it. There may be some health risks from it. But the reality is the beast power is going to rise up, and power such as the Antichrist is going to use technology such as those that 5G will allow. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Bible News Prophecy Channel.